In 1908, a little-known 20-year-old writer published a story about a failed marriage. He called it Agunot, and based on the story, used the pseudonym Shai Agnon. In 1966, Shmuel Yosef Agnon, using the name he kept from the very first story, won the Nobel Prize in Literature for his profoundly characteristic narrative art with motifs from the life of the Jewish people. Originally, the term Agunah was used to describe a woman in a marriage where it could not be determined if the husband was alive. Jewish law does not allow someone to remarry without a divorce document, known as a get. Without evidence that the husband is deceased, and without a get document, women could be chained to a marriage that they couldn't even be sure still existed. Nowadays, the issue of Agunot has expanded far beyond those original cases. A husband must divorce his wife of his own volition. He cannot be forced. If a husband refuses to give a get, even if we know for certain that he is alive and even if we know exactly where he lives, a woman held hostage in such a dead marriage is an Agunah. She needs a divorce document to remarry, and her husband refuses to grant one. Agunah's story is not about these kinds of cases of Agunot. It's not about when the husband's status cannot be determined, and it is not about an instance where a recalcitrant husband refused to grant a get. Instead, it's about a marriage between Dinah, the daughter of a wealthy Jerusalem family, and Ezekiel, a Polish scholar who is brought to Jerusalem in order to marry Dinah. But both Dinah and Ezekiel are interested in someone else. Dinah is in love with an artist named Ben Uri, and Ezekiel is in love with a girl from home in Poland. Far from the contemporary issue of Agunah, the story of Dinah and Ezekiel touches upon a broader issue: estrangement. The dissonance inside a marriage, the alienation of being in a new land, the distance between the love in one's heart and the actual context of our lives. As literary critic Adam Kirsch wrote about this story in The New Yorker, the most shocking thing about Agunot, given the time and the place in which it was written, is that it portrays another kind of failed marriage between Jewish immigrants and the land of Israel. Ezekiel, who represents the best of Eastern European Judaism, its piety, devotion, and intellectual power, cannot find happiness in Jerusalem. Quoting from the story, "His feet are planted in the gates of Jerusalem and stand on her soil, but his eyes and his heart are pledged to houses of study and worship abroad. And even now, as he walked in the hills of Jerusalem, he fancies himself among the scholars of his own town, strolling in the fields to take the evening air." In many ways, it is the underlying dissonance that the story addresses that makes the contemporary plight of Agunot all the more relevant. Dalia Oziel, a 25-year-old social media influencer, began a movement highlighting the plight of modern Agunot. Within a few weeks, social media feeds were flooded with the hashtag #FreeChava, bringing attention to a woman whose husband was refusing to give her a get. More and more people got involved, both men and women, and the fight to free Agunot, sometimes conducted through demonstrations outside the homes of get refusers, took on a whole new light and urgency on social media platforms. Alongside this incredible groundswell of support bubbled up conversations about broader issues, including the boundaries of halachic innovation and gender distinctions in Judaism, all within the very modern world of social media. Of course, the confluence of issues should not distract from the plight of actual women trapped in broken marriages, but the emergence of these issues together feel reminiscent of Ezekiel standing firmly in Jerusalem, wondering if he will ever return to the world he left. Negotiating between these worlds, old and new, remains a theme throughout modern religious life. Agunah's story begins with midrashic imagery. God is described as weaving a talus with the thread of the deeds of the Jewish people. This talus is meant to wrap Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of the Jewish people. But if the behavior of the Jewish people is not loving, is not gracious, is not empathetic, then the thread of this grand talus begins to fray and could even tear. And perhaps that's what we are still contending with, creating a collective talus through our communal support, love, and graciousness that can protect the Jewish people in worlds old and new.